Ever since we were little, Carl was always a crybaby, and I always called him my wife. That was until the day he presented as an enigma, crying as he asked me, "If I'm an enigma, will you still love me?" As an S-class alpha, I braced myself and nodded. But inside, my heart was howling. Where is my Omega wife? Where is my sweet, soft little Omega? Edwin's phone screen suddenly lit up in the dim room, accompanied by Carl's thick, tearful plea for help. "Edwin, I feel so terrible." Without wasting a single second, Edwin grabbed his jacket, his knuckles turning white from gripping the doorknob so tightly. As a top-tier S-class alpha who had presented at 16, Edwin had only one thought in his mind right now. His beautiful, doll-like, soon-to-be Omega wife, who had been a crybaby since childhood, was finally presenting at 19. The click of the key turning in the lock had barely faded when the heavy door was pushed wide open. The air in the living room seemed to instantly solidify into something tangible. A visible, milky white luminescence filled the space, like thousands of overlapping, pure white petals swirling and falling in a frantic, silent dance. These were Carl's raging pheromones. Before Edwin could even take half a step inside, his knees buckled, crashing heavily onto the hardwood floor of the entryway. His pupils instantly dilated, veins pulsed visibly at his temples, and an inescapable weight pressed down on his chest like a massive, invisible boulder. This didn't feel like the kind of commotion a normal Omega presentation would cause. Fighting through his alpha instincts of trembling and absolute defense, Edwin gripped the doorframe tightly and stumbled to his feet. As the distance closed, the storm of cold, white shimmering dust grew even more intense. On the couch, Carl was curled into a tight ball, his originally neat clothes torn haphazardly open, revealing large swathes of flushed, heated skin. Hearing footsteps, Carl slowly lifted his head. Those usually dewy eyes were now an intense, deep scarlet. His thick lashes were heavy with shattered tears, the corners of his eyes damp and red, while his jawline was tight with extreme restraint. "Edwin, I feel so bad," he let out a hoarse whimper. Edwin strode over, and the moment his hand touched Carl's shoulder, a scorching heat burned straight through his palm. He instinctively released his own pheromones to soothe him, powerfully carving a streak of warm, fiery gold right through the raging cold white dust in the air. The golden specks of light were like the midday sun in early summer, carrying a dry heat that slowly drove away and neutralized the solidifying white mist around them. Carl's tightly furrowed brow slightly relaxed. He threw himself into Edwin's arms like a drowning man catching a lifeline, his arms locking inescapably around the alpha's narrow waist. He pressed his burning cheek against the skin of Edwin's neck, his nose rubbing greedily against the pulsing carotid artery, as if chasing the very source of the scent. "Edwin, it's so warm," Carl murmured absent-mindedly, his trembling fingertips restlessly slipping under the hem of Edwin's shirt and tracing across his taut abdominal muscles. Every muscle in Edwin's body instantly went rigid, his Adam's apple bobbed sharply, and a blush crept unstoppably up the tips of his ears. Even though they were childhood best friends, this burning, delicate, endlessly needy body in his arms right now held a fatal visual impact and an irresistible magnetism for any young alpha experiencing his first stirrings of desire. To suppress Carl's agony, Edwin gritted his teeth and allowed the pheromones of a top-tier alpha within him to erupt exponentially, fiercely intertwining with the room full of cold white light. "Is that enough?" Edwin's voice was terrifyingly hoarse. "Mm-hmm." Carl seemed to find a moment of satisfaction, but his gaze only grew more hollow and feverish. Those trembling fingers trailed all the way up Edwin's spine, landing with absolute precision on the most vulnerable, inviolable gland at the back of the alpha's neck, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Hiss!" Edwin gasped sharply. The muscles in his neck instantly flared up as he ducked his head in fierce restraint. "Don't touch that." Turning a deaf ear to the warning, Carl rested dazedly against Edwin's broad shoulder. His tears suddenly broke like a dam, heavy drops crashing onto Edwin's collarbone. "Edwin, you said you'd be good to me. You're just a liar. Are you disgusted by me? You won't even let me touch your gland." Looking into those pitiful, tear-soaked eyes, Edwin's internal defenses instantly crumbled. He closed his eyes in defeat, his hands dropping powerlessly to his sides. All right, Your Highness. Do whatever you want. Touch whatever you like. Just please, don't cry." Having received permission, a barely noticeable dark glint flashed beneath Carl's lowered lashes. He leaned close to the back of Edwin's neck, the wet heat of his tongue tentatively brushing over the raised gland. Edwin felt as if struck by lightning. His back arched violently as a fierce shudder ran through him. The pure instinct of an alpha whose territory was being encroached upon made him subconsciously want to push the person in his arms away. But in the next second, his hands were firmly and inescapably pinned behind his back by Carl. Immediately after, Carl opened his mouth. His sharp canines mercilessly pierced the skin at the back of Edwin's neck, sinking deep into the gland. A sharp ache shot through Edwin's limbs like a surge of electricity. He threw his head back with an agonizing, muffled gasp. Cold sweat instantly soaked through his shirt, his vision tearing apart from the overwhelming sensation. An absolute, overriding domination surged wildly into his veins. He had been temporarily marked. Why could Carl mark an alpha? Was he some special type of Omega? That was the last question in Edwin's mind before the intense wave stripped away his consciousness. This question soon found its answer. When Edwin opened his eyes again, the blinding white fluorescent lights of the hospital had replaced that raging cold white luminescent dust. By the hospital bed, the doctor handed him Carl's presentation test report. Edwin's eyes scanned the paper, and when he saw the bold black letters reading secondary gender, Enigma, the world before him violently tilted. Only one thought remained in his head. Where is my wife? Where is my delicate, soft little Omega wife? Doctor, did you guys make a mistake? Is the machine broken? Edwin gripped the edge of the blanket tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes filled with a desperate struggle. Carl is so beautiful. How could he possibly be an enigma? The doctor adjusted his glasses in resignation, shattering his illusions with a perfectly flat tone. Looks have some correlation with gender, but it's not an absolute rule. Our hospital wouldn't mess up a secondary gender. Seeing Edwin's head droop in despair, the doctor flipped a page in the chart and added, "By the way, because your partner presented so late, he has pheromone dysregulation. Simply put, he can't control his energy field very well, and he might go into an uncontrollable rut." Edwin opened his mouth stiffly. The words "has not my partner" yet caught in his dry throat, ultimately turning into a sigh of resignation as he surrendered to fate. "Doctor, is this condition serious?" "It's not an incurable disease. Regular suppressants can manage it." The doctor closed the chart, his gaze sweeping meaningfully over the gauze taped to the back of Edwin's neck. "However, the best remedy is soothing from a partner. A natural bond is always better than synthetic suppressants." The doctor patted Edwin's shoulder and turned to leave. Under the pale overhead lights of the hallway, Edwin looked like a petrified statue completely stripped of its soul. Carl had presented as an enigma. The word hit like a sledgehammer, instantly smashing the golden filter in Edwin's mind of his sweet, soft Omega wife to pieces. Over a decade of memories flashed by, the beautiful 4-year-old boy in a floral dress, the tender face blushing as he called him hubby while playing house. Those memories, once bathed in a warm orange glow, were now ruthlessly buried under the cold white frost of reality. Taking a deep breath and pushing down the surging wave of instinctive rejection, Edwin opened the door to the adjacent hospital room. The air in the room was so heavy it felt like it could freeze into solid ice. Carl was curled up on the large hospital bed, arms wrapping his knees so tightly, his knuckles were a sickly pale white. Hearing the noise, he jerked his head up. His delicate face was streaked with chaotic tears, his once clear eyes now heavily flushed, a faint glimmer of absolute despair flickering deep in his pupils. "Edwin." Carl's jawline trembled violently. "I didn't present as an Omega. Are you going to leave me?" Edwin's heart gave a sharp pang as he took long strides to the bedside, quickly pulling out a handful of tissues. "How could I? Don't let your imagination run wild." Edwin's fingers gently wiped away the burning tears, feeling the slight tremor of the other's skin beneath his fingertips. "No matter what you turn out to be, everything will be just like before." Carl sniffled his slightly red nose. His tear-washed eyes were astonishingly bright, like the melting waters of a lake in early spring. He carefully gripped Edwin's sleeve. Then, "Will you still go to school with me tomorrow? Will you go to class with me?" "I will, yeah." Receiving a firm promise, Carl's tense spine finally relaxed. He smoothly wrapped his arms around Edwin's waist from behind, pressing his cheek against the broad back, his nose naturally drifting toward the gauze-covered back of Edwin's neck. Then, "Can I still bite you?" A chill ran down Edwin's neck, his pupils shrinking in absolute defense. Like a cat whose tail had just been stepped on, he reflexively sprang off the bed, backing a full 3 feet away. Maybe let's not do that?" The temperature in the room, which had just begun to warm up, instantly plummeted to freezing. The faint light in Carl's eyes dimmed inch by inch, and the cold white spots of light around him began to flicker restlessly and violently, as if threatening to turn into a blizzard the next second. Edwin silently cursed his own overreaction and quickly stepped forward to do damage control, his hands gesturing helplessly. "Carl, it's not that I hate you, it's just our pheromones clash too much. Getting bitten actually hurts quite a bit." Carl bit his lower lip aggrievedly, the tooth marks turning white, but the doctor said a mark doesn't hurt that much every time. "If we do it a few more times, once you completely accept my pheromones, it'll be fine." "What? We have to do it a few more times?" Edwin panicked, wanting to bite his own tongue off the second the words left his mouth. A deathly silence fell over the hospital room. Carl lowered his thick lashes, and without warning, massive teardrops smashed into the pristine white blanket, blooming into patches of dark water stains. "Edwin, you just don't like being marked by me, do you?" Carl's voice carried a heavy, crying hitch. "I knew you only like omegas. Go find an omega then. Didn't you call me your wife? Didn't you say you loved me? Will you still love me now that I'm an enigma?" The exhausting, tearful interrogation threw Edwin's heart into a state of total chaos. Looking into those beautiful eyes, brimming with tears and radiating sorrow, the protective instinct deep within the alpha's bones ultimately won out. He sighed and sat back on the edge of the bed, using his slightly calloused thumb to wipe away the tears on Carl's face bit by bit, his gaze sincere yet helpless. "Carl, give me a little time, okay? I just need to get used to this. How long do you need?" Carl sniffled, gazing at him with wide, wet eyes. "I don't know. Maybe a few weeks? Or a month? That long?" Carl's gaze instantly turned dark and unfathomable, like an apex predator locking onto its prey. His eyes fixed intensely on the vulnerable gland at the back of Edwin's neck, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly. "Do you really want to bite me that badly?" Edwin's scalp tingled from the intense stare. "I do." Before the words even faded, Carl lunged forward, burying his face deep into the crook of Edwin's neck and taking a greedy, deep breath. "Because you smell too good." The Monday morning light spilled into the boys' dorm room. "Hey, I was wondering why the air in our room is completely filled with this icy, overwhelming dominance." "Edwin, did Carl really present as an enigma?" Faced with his roommate's gossipy stares, Edwin ran a frustrated hand through his hair and nodded. "Damn. Can you two even still be together? If you aren't you going to be?" The roommate smiled mischievously, his hands making an exaggerated gesture of absolute submission and domination. "Get lost. We were never dating to begin with." Edwin's sharp brows shot up, and he stretched out a long leg, kicking the back of his roommate's chair heavily. "It'd be amazing if you were." "Never thought I'd see the day our handsome Edwin gets pinned down." The roommate dodged nimbly, tucking his textbook under his arm and laughing as he fled out the door. The heavy iron door slammed shut, and a dead silence returned to the dorm. Edwin sat dejectedly on the edge of his bed, burying his hands in his hair in sheer distress. He slowly pulled open the drawer of his nightstand. Inside lay a beautiful pink velvet gift box. It was the confession gift he had prepared long ago, just waiting for Carl to present as an omega so he could give it to him. He had even secretly rehearsed the names of their future children on countless late nights. Edwin stared blankly at the pink box, his chest heaving heavily, his eyes filled with absolute helplessness. The setting sun bathed the basketball court in large swathes of warm, vibrant orange. Perhaps the news of Carl presenting as an enigma had spread because Edwin received several love letters along the way. Not having the heart to throw them away in front of people, Edwin placed the letters on a bench by the court, planning to find a hidden trash can to toss them later. After the game, he found Carl sitting on that very bench. He stood up gripping a wet towel, approached with a dark expression, and without saying a word, slapped the towel onto Edwin's head, rubbing it fiercely into the sweat-soaked short hair almost as if venting his anger. Edwin even softened his breathing, his tall frame slightly hunched over as he submissively let him do as he pleased. Just as this undercurrent of tension surged, a hand abruptly reached over. A blurry-faced but exquisitely dressed Omega boy excitedly leaned in. "Edwin, you must be tired from playing. I brought some water. Here you go." "Edwin." Carl's motion of drying the hair came to an abrupt halt, his voice as cold as forged ice. "Am I dead to you?" Edwin's spine stiffened. He was just about to offer an apologetic smile when Carl's normally clear eyes instantly darkened, his icy gaze shooting right over Edwin's shoulder to pierce the Omega. I'm not even dead yet, and someone's already rushing over to seduce you. Boom. In a split second, an overwhelming scent of gardenia exploded in the air, sweeping across the entire court. A thick, intensely cold white halo shattered the atmosphere, sending thousands of translucent, pure white petal illusions floating through the air. It was like an inescapable, suffocating blizzard violently surging outward with Carl at the epicenter. The sheer, formidable energy field of an Enigma utterly crushed everyone present. The Omega who had offered the water covered his mouth in terror, stumbling back several steps before turning and fleeing for his life. Carl didn't even spare him a passing glance. He stared fixedly at Edwin, the corners of his eyes flushing a vibrant scarlet from extreme grievance, his slender fingers pulling that stack of crumpled pink love letters from his pocket. You really do still like Omegas. So many little OS like you? Which one are you planning to pick? As his emotions lost control, his pheromones transformed into an impenetrable towering wall, frantically crushing the space around Edwin. I didn't. Edwin's defense was pale and weak. Since you want to court Omegas so much, go ahead and have your fill. I'm never coming to look for you again. Carl forcefully smashed the love letters onto the ground, tears bursting from his eyes as he turned furiously and stormed off into the cold white dust. However, merely 3 seconds later, that slender silhouette returned, eyes completely red. Why didn't you chase after me? Carl was in tears, precarious water droplets hanging from his long lashes. I knew you changed. Carl. Edwin dropped heavily to one knee, tightly clutching the back of his neck, veins bulging and throbbing furiously. Cold sweat dripped wildly along his tense jawline. Pull back. Your pheromones, I can't move. Carl froze for a second, and the raging white mist around them instantly receded like the tide. He frantically dropped down beside Edwin, his cool fingertips gently kneading the swollen, burning gland, his voice so soft it sounded like begging. I'm sorry. Does it hurt? Edwin winced and drew in a sharp breath of cold air, but still forcibly swallowed down his cry of pain. I'm fine. I'm fine. That day, Edwin spent a long time coaxing Carl. In reality, Carl spent most of the time rambling, soaking in jealousy for quite a while. He complained that the little Omega's outfit and makeup were ugly, perhaps feeling that he had dressed too casually that day and failed to completely outshine the other person. Edwin truly couldn't understand Carl's thought process. Edwin simply felt that Carl looked so breathtaking in whatever he wore that he didn't even seem real, operating on a completely different dimension from everyone else. Later on, Carl found an opportunity to show Edwin just how stunning he looked when dressed up. Backstage at the school anniversary performance, under the blinding spotlights, Carl was draped in an extremely sheer, delicate white veil, the pristine white wings on his back shimmering with a sacred glow against the backlight. Edwin's atoms apple-bobbed violently. With reddened ears, he took off his jacket and thoroughly wrapped up that alluring body, which possessed an irresistible magnetism capable of provoking every alpha instinct. Who are you trying to seduce, wearing so little? Seducing you. Carl leaned close to his ear and softly whispered. After the performance ended, Edwin waited in the audience until the crowd had completely dispersed, but Carl still hadn't appeared. His phone buzzed with a text from him. I left my foundation in the dressing room. Help me find it. Edwin sighed and made his way to the backstage area, pushing open the door to the dressing room. It was dimly lit and completely empty. Edwin stood in front of the messy vanity, his eyes scanning across a table full of makeup cases. Just as he was about to turn around, a sharp, crisp sound echoed behind him. Click. The door was locked from the inside. In the next second, a familiar body pressed seamlessly against his back. Carl gently rested his chin on Edwin's broad shoulder. In the dim vanity mirror, a flawless face exuding absolute control was perfectly reflected. Carl, what are you doing? Shh. Carl's long, pale fingers traced along the lines of Edwin's abdominal muscles, slipping effortlessly into the waistband of his pants. If you don't like it, just push me away. Edwin's entire body jolted violently, as if a high-voltage current had shot straight through his spine. His face flushed bright red, and he frantically pressed his forearms against the heated mirror, trying to hide his flustered expression brought on by sudden arousal. His last remaining shred of alpha reason screamed at him to push away, but in this cramped space, faced with those clear eyes, he couldn't move a single finger. Still not running? Carl's voice was as soft as a feather, laced with a hint of triumphant amusement. He tilted his head, like a lazy predator, the wet softness of his tongue gently sweeping over the gland at the back of Edwin's neck. Immediately after, his canines pierced the flesh without any mercy. Buzz. The shadows in the dressing room were instantly ignited. Gardenia-scented pheromones surged in. The alternating waves of pain and scalp, tingling pleasure assaulted his nerves, and Edwin bit down hard on his lower lip, utterly submitting to his enigma. Ever since that loss of control in the dressing room, the dim storage closets and the silent corners of the stairwells were all marked with traces of Carl marking Edwin. Whenever the cold white halo belonging to the enigma at the back of Edwin's neck dimmed even slightly, or if an Omega happened to strike up a conversation, Carl would act like a deeply insecure beast, cornering him inescapably against the wall. Edwin knew deep down that this was Carl's extreme anxiety post-presentation. But the traditional values in his bones made it impossible to accept this kind of ambiguous, unspoken possession without a formal confession. More fatally, his subconscious was still waging a war within itself. Could he truly overcome his alpha instincts to accept the absolute domination of an enigma? Finally, in a dark corner of the academic building, just as that scent of gardenia curled around Edwin's neck like twisting vines once more, he abruptly gripped Carl's wrist. "Carl, we really shouldn't do this anymore." Carl looked up in sheer bewilderment. "Why? Don't you really like my pheromones?" "Liking them is one thing." Edwin's atoms apple-bobbed as he forcefully suppressed the heat inside him, giving a dry cough. "But whether we can do this is another matter. Stop temporarily marking me. We're not partners right now. This is crossing the line. What's wrong with it?" Carl relentlessly clung to him, his fingertips affectionately tracing Edwin's gland as the white light around him flickered wildly. "Right now, you smell entirely of me from head to toe. This way, no other Omega will ever dare to get close to you. But it hurts a lot." Edwin sighed in exasperation. "I'm sorry. I'll be gentler next time." "There shouldn't be a next time." Edwin frantically took a half step back. Those words were like a sharp blade. A poignant, vivid redness instantly bloomed at the corners of Carl's eyes, tears swiftly swirling in their rims. The white light surrounding him shattered into sharp ice crystals following its master's plunging emotions. "Edwin, so you're trying to cut ties with me? You want to chase after other Omegas. Only without the restriction of my mark can you freely chase anyone you want, right?" "No, no, no." Edwin completely panicked, haphazardly pulling up the clean part of his sleeve and carefully wiping away the tear stains on that beautiful face. "I really haven't set my sights on any Omega. If I'm lying, let me get out-rebounded every time I play basketball and be single for the rest of my life." Only then did Carl's tense jawline slightly loosen. He pursed his lips, fighting the urge to break into a tearful smile. "Edwin, you're so annoying." Yes, I'm annoying." Edwin gazed deeply into those clear, tear-washed eyes, his tone more serious than ever before. "I just need some time to properly think about our relationship. During this period, reel in your pheromones and don't mark me anymore, okay?" Carl stared at him fixedly for a long time before finally lowering his eyelashes in disappointment and nodding. The 2-week time frame turned into a torturous countdown for them both. As the mark on the back of Edwin's neck completely faded, Carl's restlessness intensified visibly. His pheromone dysregulation made it impossible to control the raging energy within him, and the frustration of not being able to mark his alpha made him extremely irritable, to the point where he even started avoiding Edwin. On Friday evening, the streetlights beneath the dorm stretched out Edwin's lonely shadow as he walked his bike. Learning that Carl had already headed home early, he sighed helplessly. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was an invitation to a bar gathering with the basketball club. "I'm going to a bar with the club. Might be back late. You go to bed early." Hitting the send button, Edwin stepped into the noisy nightlife. Midnight, in the dimly lit booth section of the bar. Colorful laser lights refracted wildly among the glasses. Number 4 and number 5, hug it out. The Kings game had reached its climax, and the club president was slapping the table in excitement. Edwin flipped over the playing card in his hand, the 4 of hearts. He looked up, his gaze jumping across the bottles on the table, and the smile on his face froze instantly. Holding the number 5 card was none other than the Omega who had confessed to him on the basketball court. "Edwin, is it okay?" Jimmy, wearing exquisite makeup, stood up under the hazy lights with eyes full of anticipation. Edwin waved his hands repeatedly as if electrocuted, his body practically plastered against the backrest of the sofa. No, no, let's just skip it. I understand. Jimmy bit his lower lip, a hint of disappointment flashing in his eyes as he picked up a full glass of the penalty liquor from the table. If it's truly inconvenient for Edwin, he'll drink it. The moment the liquor hit his throat, Jimmy began coughing violently. Cough, cough. Sorry. The Omega's physiological tears instantly spilled out, his eyes turning entirely red, yet he still forced himself to chug it down. This pitiful appearance immediately ignited the protective instincts of the surrounding alphas. Why are you making things hard for an Omega? Edwin, are you even an alpha? Just give him a hug. It's not a big deal. Yeah. Hug. Hug. The deafening cheers echoed like a tidal wave inside the cramped booth. Edwin's scalp tingled from the noise. He grabbed the bottle and filled 3 shot glasses in a row, intending to shut everyone up with alcohol. Just as Edwin's fingertips were about to graze the glass, the bar's previously sweltering air was instantly frozen solid by a terrifying drop in temperature in a fraction of a second. A well-defined hand, so pale that blue veins showed through, steadily intercepted the drink. I'll drink it. The cold, commanding voice, saturated with absolute dominance, instantly choked off all the cheering. Edwin's eyes snapped up. Amidst the shifting light and shadows, Carl stood there. He tilted that breathtakingly beautiful yet ice-cold face up, his Adam's apple rolling, as he downed the strong liquor in one gulp. The burning alcohol made him frown in restraint. His slender fingers roughly wiped away the spilled drops at the corner of his lips as he reached for the second glass without a moment's hesitation. Carl, stop. Edwin stood up in a panic to snatch it away. Move. Carl aggressively swept his arm, and the formidable energy field of an Enigma delivered a physical push, slamming Edwin heavily back into the couch. Under everyone's horrified gaze, Carl chugged down the remaining 2 glasses back to back. The high-proof alcohol rapidly burned a sickly blush onto that pale face. He leaned heavily against the marble table with both hands, chest heaving violently, his fingertips trembling uncontrollably. Edwin's heart spasmed with ache. He instantly reached out to drape an arm around his shoulder. Carl, don't do this, it'll take you home. But Carl violently slapped his hand away and slowly turned his head. Those staggeringly red eyes, tainted with intoxication, locked onto Edwin amidst the bizarre cold white phenomenon. Didn't you say you like playing with Omegas? Carrying a highly aggressive aura of frost, he dropped heavily into the seat beside Edwin, adopting a completely inescapable posture, coming so close their noses almost touched. Then I'll play with you. The glass bottle spun wildly on the hard marble table, finally coming to a stop with a sharp screech, the neck pointing squarely at Edwin. I want to know what Edwin thinks of me, Jimmy stammered, nervously clutching the hem of his shirt. Edwin's gaze leaped past the flashing laser lights around them and landed straight onto the person beside him, who was already enveloped in a violently repressed, cold white halo. He furrowed his sharp brows, ruthlessly cutting off the rising cheers around them. I don't have any thoughts about you, and besides, I already have someone I like. Carl's eye rims were flush red, his irises glistening. He was trying with all his might to hold back his tears. In the next round, the bottle pointed to Carl. Carl, do you like Edwin? Amidst the uproar that threatened to tear the roof off, Carl slowly raised his head. Those tear-washed, thoroughly red eyes stared unblinkingly at Edwin. In the air, the pure white petal illusions began to peel away and scatter piece by piece. I don't like Edwin. He picked up a shot of strong liquor and tossed it back. The tears finally shattered from his eyes. I hate Edwin. The second glass. The shimmering dust fractured even more completely. I never want to see Edwin again. I don't want to go to school with him. Seeing him talk to other Omegas doesn't bother me at all. I don't want to temporarily mark him. I don't want to permanently mark him. Edwin is the worst. With every lie uttered against his own heart, he forced himself to down another shot of burning liquor. Until tears completely ruined that unimaginably beautiful face, Carl sobbed uncontrollably, grabbing the entire bottle to pour it directly into his mouth. Veins throbbed at Edwin's temples. He hauled the person up from the couch in one motion. Sorry, we're leaving. In the back seat of a midnight taxi, the dim yellow glow of the streetlights washed continuously across their faces. Carl clung desperately to Edwin's neck, Thoroughly wasted, hiccuping while crying and screaming, "Edwin, you big idiot, you only like Omegas." Edwin helplessly wiped the tears from his face with his thumb, a wave of powerlessness washing over him. This person who looked like a porcelain doll actually had a one-way circuit for a brain. The fact that he liked a fictional Omega version of Carl was immediately translated into, he only likes Omegas. He carried him home on his back and settled him on the couch. Edwin then turned into the bedroom to make the bed. However, when he fluffed the pillows and returned to the living room, the couch was completely empty. A sliver of pale white light spilled from beneath the bathroom door. There was no sound of running water, just a silence so profound it made his scalp crawl. "Carl, are you in there?" Edwin knocked on the door. No response. Suddenly, an agonizing, desperately suppressed whimper, like a dying beast, escaped from behind the wooden door. Edwin's pupils rapidly contracted, his heart feeling as if a massive, invisible hand had brutally crushed it. "Carl." Accompanied by a furious roar, Edwin delivered a flying kick. With a massive bang, the wooden door was violently kicked open, slamming hard against the wall. The sight before him caused Edwin's breath to seize instantly, nearly sending him into shock on the spot. Under the harsh, pale overhead light of the bathroom, the cold white dust in the air flickered and twisted weakly. Carl had his head slightly bowed. His left hand forcefully held up the long hair at the back of his neck, while his right hand maintained a death grip on a sharp pair of silver scissors. The blades had already mercilessly pierced the skin and flesh of the gland that symbolized a top-tier enigma. A shocking streak of striking crimson was utterly blinding against the pale expanse of light and shadow. He was actually trying to gouge out his own gland. "Carl." Edwin charged over like a madman. He grabbed Carl's wrist, now stained with stark scarlet, the motion of disarming him rough and totally resolute. "Are you out of your fucking mind?" During the struggle, terrified that the sharp blades might cut Edwin, Carl's fingers suddenly loosened. With a metallic clatter, the stained scissors crashed into the sink. Using every ounce of strength in his body, Edwin aggressively pulled that trembling, freezing figure into his burning embrace. His chest heaved violently, even his breathing shivering. "Carl, what the hell are you doing? Are you trying to scare me to death?" The harsh roar caused Carl to break down once more. He slumped into Edwin's arms, tears mixing with the crimson hue, grieved to the absolute limit. "Anyway, this gland is useless anyway. I might as well dig it out. Grow a new one. If it grows into an Omegas, you'll like me then, won't you?" Edwin felt as if struck by lightning. This top-tier Enigma gland, which countless people in the world lusted after madly, was entirely worthless in Carl's eyes compared to a mere chance that Edwin might like him. "How do you know I don't like you?" Edwin's voice cracked from the sheer heartbreak, his large hand pressing firmly against the wound on the back of the neck. You won't even let me bite you." Carl cried until his entire body convulsed, his damp eyelashes drooping. "We're already in college, and we haven't even kissed. You stopped calling me your wife. You definitely don't like me anymore." The endless barrage of aggrieved questions was abruptly cut off in the next second. Edwin swooped down, sealing those two trembling lips completely with a scorching, unwavering kiss. After an incredibly brief contact, he pulled back half an inch, their warm breaths tangling. On that tear-streaked face, he clearly saw Carl's pupils instantly dilate. "Stop crying, wife." Edwin's voice was completely hoarse, carrying endless indulgence and heartache. Taking advantage of the moment Carl was stunned by the long-lost title, Edwin slightly turned his head, wanting to carefully check the still-seeping wound. However, in a window of merely half a second, bang! Edwin's back was forcefully shoved against the freezing tile wall. The porcelain doll who was crying just a second ago had thoroughly torn away the disguise of fragility at this exact moment. The absolute dominance of an enigma inescapably pinned Edwin against the wall, leaving him entirely unable to move. Carl slightly angled his face, the corners of his eyes flushed red. Striking from a position of absolute superiority, he flawlessly captured Edwin's lips. Unlike Edwin's soothing, light kiss from moments prior, this was a highly aggressive, almost devouring deep kiss. The cold white dust violently churned within the cramped space, acting like tangible chains that tightly bound the two of them together. Their noses brushed against each other. Edwin could even clearly feel the tiny breeze from Carl's long eyelashes fluttering, as well as that lingering, scalding teardrop on his cheek. Carl domineeringly pried open Edwin's lips, driving straight in to engage in the deepest, most intensely entwined clash. That precarious teardrop quietly slipped down amidst the fiercely overlapping light and shadows, eventually melting between their lips, drank up by both of them together. The smell of disinfectant permeated the air under the pale lights of the emergency room. The moment the doctor's diagnosis landed, Edwin's taut spine finally relaxed. The blade had gone slightly off course, only slicing the outer skin without damaging the depths of the gland. However, when the prescription slip listing 50 vials of suppressants was slapped heavily onto the desk, Edwin's pupils contracted violently again. 3 vials a day. Hez an Enigma. His dosage is triple that of a normal alpha. The sound of the doctor typing on the keyboard was cold and mechanical. Edwin whipped his head around, staring intensely at the person beside him, whose head was bowed, fingertips anxiously twisting the hem of his shirt. Carl had been terrified of pain since childhood. He would cry for ages over a mere scratch. Yet during this time, he had silently endured the torment of hundreds and thousands of needle pricks all on his own. "Why didn't you tell me?" Edwin forcefully seized Carl's icy palm, his knuckles white from the grip, his voice laced with tremors and suppressed heartache. Carl, with slightly red eye corners, turned his face away somewhat unnaturally, propping up a nonchalant smile at the corner of his mouth. "I just didn't want to emotionally blackmail you." At that exact moment, Edwin's chest felt as if it had been brutally struck by a heavy hammer. He looked at the fragility and insecurity flickering in Carl's eyes, and all his confusion and hesitation vanished into thin air in an instant. There was absolutely no such thing as compatibility or passive retreat. He just ached for this proud, delicate person, right down to the marrow of his bones. Edwin took a deep breath, pushing down the choke in his throat, his jawline drawn extremely tight, and turned back to the doctor. If a permanent mark can alleviate his symptoms, would that be better than a temporary mark? The air fell totally silent for a second. Carl looked up in sheer disbelief, a stunning brilliance instantly bursting from those tear-filled eyes. Their gazes collided in midair, then swiftly darted away as if electrocuted, both their ears flashing a deep scarlet in the blink of an eye. The doctor pushed up his glasses, adding plainly, "A permanent mark absolutely works. With a permanently marked partner, there's no need for injections. But since you're an S-class alpha, the mark might gradually fade, meaning it will require repeated marking, frequent marking to be effective." Hearing the words repeated marking, Edwin wanted nothing more than to bury his entire face in his collar, his hands gripping the fabric at his knees for dear life. Yet Carl beside him suddenly burst into a soft laugh. Those beautiful eyes curved into crescents, looking as if an entire galaxy had fallen into them. His clear laughter rippled through the clinic room. "All right, doctor, we understand." As the horizon began to turn the pale color of a fish's belly, the two walked shoulder to shoulder down the deserted street. The faint morning light pierced the thin mist, stretching their shadows incredibly long. Carl was in an impossibly good mood. He spun around, threw his arms wide open, and lunged into Edwin's embrace. Like a clingy kitten, he rubbed affectionately against the crook of Edwin's neck, his bright voice brimming with unhidden anticipation. "Are we going home to Mark?" "Can we, Edwin?" Looking into those star-filled eyes, Edwin couldn't help but curve his lips in a helpless smile, bringing his hands up to lock the person tightly in his arms. We can. Returning to the front door of their apartment building, the heavy door slammed shut the very second the lock clicked open. The two distinct pheromones instantly thickened, twisting together inseparably. Carl threw his arms inescapably around Edwin's neck, pressing his wet, soft lips forward without any restraint, sealing every gasp and whimper between their mouths. The gardenia pheromones drifted down Edwin's spine like clinging vines, frantically seeping into every inch of his skin. "Be a good boy. Relax a little," Carl whispered in his ear, his breath scorching. However, the natural instinctual resistance between a top-tier alpha and an Enigma turned this marking process into a lengthy, grueling battle. Not long after, the Enigma, who had just been holding the dominant position, started whining with a tearful edge. "Edwin, you're hurting me." "Ah, it hurts." Then, "Do we keep going?" Fine beads of sweat gathered at Edwin's temples, his muscles completely tense, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. "Of course we do. You're not marked yet," Carl complained through his tears, squirming delicately in his arms. "Edwin, why are you so hard to mark?" This back-and-forth siege lasted a full day and night. When the permanent mark was finally successful, Carl rested perfectly content in Edwin's arms, falling into a deep, sound sleep. The next morning, Golden sunlight blanketed the large bed. Edwin woke up before Carl. Every muscle in his body ached as if he had been run over by a heavy truck. He gritted his teeth, wincing as he gently shifted the octopus tangled around him. Fighting back the sharp pain in his lower back, he put on his clothes and silently slipped next door to his own apartment. A moment later, he returned, holding an exquisite velvet box. Carl was still fast asleep on the bed, his slender eyelashes casting small shadows under his eyes. Edwin took a half-kneel beside the bed, his thumb gently tracing across that flawless face, softly calling out, "Carl, give me your left hand." In his sleepy daze, Carl obediently extended his long, slender left hand. Edwin opened the box and took out the silver couple's ring he had prepared so long ago, slowly sliding it down to the base of Carl's ring finger. Then, he slipped the matching ring onto his own hand. The cool sensation caused Carl to snap his eyes open. He struggled up into a sitting position, looking somewhat flustered, staring blankly at the silver band reflecting the sunlight on his left ring finger. His long lashes trembled violently. "This is..." Edwin took his hand, slightly tilting his head up in the warm morning light, his gaze unshakably sincere. "Yesterday was too rushed. I didn't even have time to say my confession. Carl, I love you. Will you be engaged to me?" Carl stared at him blankly, large, crystal-clear teardrops instantly welling up in his clear eyes. The tears trailed down his slightly flushed cheeks, yet on that impossibly beautiful face bloomed the most radiant, the most certain smile. He tightly grasped Edwin's hand, which bore the matching ring, and smiled. "Edwin, I do."
And that is where our story ends. Stepping into Edwin's shoes, it's honestly hilarious. He spent over a decade dreaming of his sweet, soft Omega wife, only for Carl to present as a top-tier enigma. Just thinking about it feels like the sky is falling. But even after presenting as a top-tier enigma, Carl is still exactly who he has always been. He is proud, deeply sensitive, quick to shed tears whenever things go wrong, and above all else, he loves Edwin the most. Seeing a drunk Carl, paralyzed by the fear of being abandoned, standing in the bathroom and raising those scissors to the back of his neck in a desperate attempt to become an Omega, that didn't just terrify Edwin, it completely shattered my heart. Fortunately, that sharp sting of scarlet pierced through all of their stubbornness. Edwin finally woke up to the absolute truth. He never loved a specific secondary gender. He loved Carl, the person. When the morning sunlight spilled into the room, and Edwin, fighting through the deep ache in his muscles, half-kneeled by the bed to slip the couple's ring onto a sleepy Carl's finger and firmly delivered his long-overdue confession, my heart finally found its perfect closure. There is no rule saying an enigma can't cry, and there is certainly no rule dictating that the one who is marked must rely on someone else. Carl and Edwin are simply a match made in heaven. If you loved this story, don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.